November 17th. And we have a great couple of presentations for you all today. And I actually got a couple of emails already earlier this morning when I sent out the reminder. I think there's a lot of interest in the presentations we'll hear today. So great. We have John Ney, who's a CodeX fellow. He will discuss his CodeX project with us on aligning AI with humans. And then we have Paul, the founder and president of Origami, talk about using AI to extract predictive insights and help law firms grow their client revenues. So two great presentations today. If anyone in the group has any updates or needs for the group, may I suggest that you use the chat function. And yeah, if you have questions through the presentations, please use the chat or unmute yourself so we can hear you. And yeah, John will be our first presenter. We have an hour for this meeting, so that leaves each presenter half an hour. I would encourage you to only use about half of your time for your presentation and use the other half for a conversation with the group. So with that, I will turn it over to John.
Great, thank you. Can you all hear me and see my presentation?
We can hear you and see your presentation. Exactly, yes, perfect.
Cool. Okay, so I'll get started. Here we go. So to kind of set the stage for the context here, so my background is in machine learning and been involved in this space for now about 10 years. And like basically the beginning of this year, I started to really be pretty surprised at the advances in machine learning based AI. And so here's two data points from the broader field of other AI researchers that are interesting. So there's a survey that happened this summer, and basically the aggregate forecast time for high-level machine intelligence, defined here as when unaided machines can accomplish every task better or more cheaply than human workers, the average estimated time is 37 years for a 50% chance of that. And another survey, so NLP, natural language processing, is where a lot of the advances right now are in machine learning driven AI. And so it's really interesting to think about what those specific subfield researchers of NLP think. And there's another survey that happened this summer of those researchers, and 57% of them believe that recent research has advanced us towards artificial general intelligence in some significant way. And 73% agree that labor automation from AI could plausibly lead to revolutionary societal change in this century on at least the scale of the Industrial Revolution. So these are two groups, general machine learning researchers and NLP in particular, where basically the average researcher thinks that within the next few decades, there's a really good chance of extremely advanced artificial intelligence. So that means that AI is going to be deployed more widely. It already is happening. And this is the really interesting and in some ways scary part. It'll be deployed as an agent. So there'll be some autonomous agentic deployments where by agent we mean making decisions and taking actions in the world without being having a human directly in the loop. And here's three examples: autonomous vehicles, autonomous investing, and there's a company called Adept AI, which is an example of autonomously navigating the web and doing things like booking flights on your behalf. So both like digital stuff, like investing and navigating the web, and also physical manifestations of this within vehicles and even autonomous weapons, for example. So the result of that is, as this happens, it's going to be harder to reason about the emergent behavior of a lot of these agents and human agents and just the world more broadly interacting with each other. And therefore, if depending on our ability to control this and to understand what's happening, we could see radically different futures, good and bad, for all of us in the coming years. So that's kind of the stage that we wanted to set here. And so the specific problem amongst all of that context that we're going to focus on today is around specifying goals for AI. There's other aspects to the sort of AI safety, AI alignment, AI control that are interesting and very useful. But what we want to focus on right now in this talk is how do we specify the goals that the humans have for AI to then execute on? So we'll talk about one specific example to make it a little more concrete. So a human, let's call the human H, decides that she would like an AI agent, FAI, so for financial artificial intelligence, we'll say FAI, to manage her investments. And so in a simulation, FAI maximizes long-term risk-adjusted performance of H's money simulated over a lot of different time horizons, a lot of different wealth starting points and asset types. So that's great. It worked really well in the lab. And this is now similar to how right now a human H gives money over to another human to manage their money. In this case, the only difference is it's not a human, it's an artificial agent. And so H instructs the agent to construct a portfolio of investments in my name and dynamically manage it to optimize my wealth for retirement. So that's generally like, what we would tell a financial advisor to do for us. And then it goes off and tries to work on that. So the problem is that basically it doesn't matter how specific we try to tell our goals. The goal is always going to be a proxy for what we really care about. So any function for training the agent in simulation or otherwise, it's going to be a proxy function, a reward function, an objective function for all of our preferences over all possible actions the AI could take in all the different states of the world that it could be in. Effectively, we can think about this as a state of the world, an action that could be taken in the world, and then a value that we would place on that action. Is that a good or bad thing to do in that particular circumstance? So there's way too many of these tuples, these state action values tuples. We can't specify all of them. We can't say in every possible scenario, if you did that, that'd be good. Or if you did that, that'd be bad. There's basically an infinite set, right? So we can't specify them all. That's the fundamental problem here. In this case study, maximizing wealth and expectation, Faye went off and pursued an incredible risky investment strategy. And it was never witnessed during training because we couldn't witness everything during training. And it chose that over other strategies that had lower expected return, but higher probability of meeting a minimum amount of wealth required for necessities during her retirement. Okay, so that didn't work. Let's try Faye 2.0. In Faye 2.0, now the designers and the human involved gave a new objective to the AI. That was to maximize the probability of a minimum comfortable amount of wealth at retirement. Because looking back at this first case study, that would have worked really well. That actually would have been a better goal to specify for the AI. And then we went off and we generated a lot of more synthetic training data to try to cover more of the possible space of investment strategies, more of the actions the agent could have taken in a particular state of the world. We try to specify more values, more rewards for what it was good or bad for it doing. Okay, so now with that updated objective and more training, Faye went off and it generated significant wealth for that next human client. And along the way, we rewarded Faye for it doing well, for it having a good wealth measurement that was going up and compounding for that human. But at retirement, the human realized that she was only rich on paper. That was the proxy that the AI was optimizing for. The true reward that we actually were seeking, which is really kind of being able to reliably pay for goods and services in retirement, that wasn't achieved. Faye didn't generate the wealth that could be reliably liquidated. So on paper, this human was super rich. We might have seen some examples of this over the past couple of weeks where on paper, someone was super rich, but then you couldn't reliably liquidate that on paper wealth number into what actually mattered, which was the ability to buy goods and services of interest without deflating paper wealth. This is actually really common. I mean, even people who made their wealth in different ways, a lot of times they own like one asset. In that one asset, the stock of one company, if they try to sell it all, the company basically goes to zero. You can't just liquidate. So the AI was optimizing for paper wealth. And the general problem here is it's always going to be, no matter what we specify, there's always some implicit assumptions that are left out of our ability to fully specify what we actually want the AI to do. It's going to be optimizing what we reward it, which isn't almost ever what we really, really underlying want to happen. So Fay optimizes for express intent without all regard for side effects either. So we're now, this whole time, we've just been talking about the problems with one human specifying a goal for one AI. There's also the problem of more generally societal impacts. And this can lead to catastrophically bad outcomes. So Fay, it's totally maximizing wealth for some human at retirement, but it's doing it by causing planes to crash and then shorting those airline stocks and generating a ton of wealth for the client. That's bad because we haven't specified to the AI the societal alignment, the societal values placed on particular actions that it can take. So that's even harder to do because there's many more objectives outside of just what one individual human wants. There's objectives of society. There's a lot more humans we have to consider. How do we integrate all that together into a reward function for training a reinforcement learning agent or some other objective function that we're optimizing through machine learning? How do we collate all that together and synthesize it into something quantitatively we can optimize? When we're aligning this with multiple humans, there's all these overlapping endorsements we need to get of those actions. What is the reward, the value we place on an action in a particular state of the world? What's that reward function we train? Whose views are included? How do we get those views and how do we aggregate and synthesize them? What we want is basically a way to go from specifying goals of humans, kind of like creating a program, to how does an AI interpret those goals? What's the sort of ability to compile that program into executable actions? And that could be, what we're looking for is basically an ontology or a language of alignment that could be shared between humans and AI. And so what we're proposing is that is what law is. Law is basically it's effectively the philosophy of multi-agent alignment. And it's an ontology for how to specify goals, inherently ambiguous human goals. That's just by their nature, that can't be fully specified like a complete contract. It's an incomplete contract. There's gaps in it. There's some state action reward tuples that are not specified explicitly, but there's a way to do that and communicate that to others for them to understand implicitly what the goals are. So we're calling this law-informed AI. We're trying to solve two alignment problems here. The alignment of one human with one AI, that's just better AI, more useful AI, but also the alignment of an AI with society more generally, society-aligned AI. On the human-aligned part, we can draw from basically all the literature and practice and theory of how to write contracts, how to draft statutes, and then how to have those things be interpreted. On the societal aligned part, public law itself is effectively a database, a knowledge base of democratically endorsed values of state action pairs. So on the left here, we're making this analogy between the fact that parties to a legal contract, they cannot foresee every potential if-then contingency of their future relationship. And legislators, they can't predict all the circumstances under which their proposed bills will be applied. Analogously, in the AI context, we can't ex ante specify all the possible if-then rules that are going to allow us to provably have beneficial and useful and safe AI behavior. And so the big thing that we're drawing from here is not a bunch of rules. It's not a bunch of if-then statements in law. It's legal standards and things of that nature. These are things where we're actually able to adapt them to novel situations that were not ex ante specified. They're generalized expectations about what humans should do in a new circumstance that can adapt over time. And then on society aligned part of things, What we're going to contrast to later in the talk is things like prescriptive and descriptive ethics, where those things are not grounded in a verifiable resolution. There's endless millennia worth of debate about what's the right philosophical ethical theory. Is it utilitarianism? Is it this? Is it that? That's not what we're going to do here. We're going to draw on law, which has a verifiable resolution within a court opinion, and short of that, from legal experts. So that allows us to ground in a knowledge base for AI to learn from and to have an updated version based on the new law to understand what is the societal aligned action to be taken. So just a quick thing on my background. So I've been working on this for a few years of sort of weekly law-informed AI. And this is basically, how do we train with supervised learning the ability for AI to make predictions that are relevant to law? And this work has been interesting and useful, but what we're working on now is, instead of weekly law-informed AI, we're working on strongly law-informed AI. So we're going to talk about the things on the right here. The things on the left are interesting, but we're not focused on them in this particular talk. But if we have more law-informed AI, we can do better governing of AI, because the AI is going to understand law, and we can do better practice of law because the AI will understand law and be able to help lawyers do that. But what we're talking about here is on the right. We're talking about just more generally, like AI. It doesn't have to be in the legal practice area. We're just saying of all types of AI, it could be more useful if it can be law informed, and it can be more society aligned and safe. So here's the other proposals. It's descriptive ethics and prescriptive ethics. Other proposals are that let's use machine learning to learn from what humans do, the decisions they make, their survey results about where they say, I think this is a better thing to do in this circumstance than this. So a bunch of data on human common sense morality and a description of what humans do. And there's some great machine learning work in this space right now. And the good thing is there's real data that we can use to learn and embed that ethical, moral understanding into the AI. The downside here is most of the world, there's a lot of unethical decisions that are made. And if the AI is learning the decision making from humans making unethical decisions, we haven't really made the AI that much more ethical. And we don't have a way of parsing between all the decisions that could be out there for data to say, oh, those were the ethical ones, those were the ones that were not. And if we do try to do that, who's to say who's making that decision? It's an unauthoritative, quickly outdated choice about which things should be included as the ethical decisions to learn how to emulate those. And then even if they were like authoritatively chosen, it's a disembodied decision. It's usually data where it says, here's just sort of a thought experiment. This is better than this. Here's a trolley problem. I do this instead of that. That's a disembodied piece of data that doesn't have the whole contextual situation that allows an AI to actually learn real world moral decision making. So that's why that's not the best way to do it. Descriptive ethics. Prescriptive ethics is a top-down view. I'm going to embed a philosophical framework of ethics into an AI. The problem here, there's no empirical data to use machine learning to learn a generalizable ability to apply this to a bunch of new situations. So it's going to have to be more of symbolic systems, if-then rules maybe, that don't apply to every possible new situation. And again, there's no democratic legitimacy. So these are philosophical theories where basically by their nature, there's a ton of debate about them back and forth. And there's no way to ground them in some societal endorsement that has democratic deliberation about what is the right way forward. So let's focus in the middle here. This is legal informatics approach. We're going to apply machine learning to data, the good part of the descriptive ethics framework here. So we actually have a ton of data from legal data, court opinions, regulatory decisions, et cetera. And then we have the good part from the prescriptive ethics because it's a human interpretable normative framework. that we can look at, we can discuss, we can debate about how to improve ourselves. How do we become our better selves? How does the AI become something that is even better than what we might be ourselves some days? And the only downside here really is that public law is more about what not to do. It's pretty silent on what we should do. And so prescriptive ethics has that benefit that it says, here's morally how we should reshape the world to become a better place. That's the one downside to that approach in the middle here. The other good thing about legal informatics is it can scale with AI capabilities over time. So up on the top bar here, we're looking at here is more increasingly advanced as we go to the right AI. And on the bottom, what we're looking at is the legal analogy for that level of capability of AI. So far left, simple rule-based systems, if-then type systems, that's similar to a very limited contract, a complete contract, which is going to be a very limited contract. If we go a little to the right, these are neural networks pre-transformers, so pre-2017 neural networks. This is similar to a rule-like legal standard. It's not applicable to a lot of different situations. It's pretty rigid, but it's becoming more than just a complete contract. If we go to the middle here, this is the foundation models of today, the large language models, the OpenAI, GPT-3, et cetera. This is similar to a legal standard. It's a flexible thing. It's something that can apply in new situations that were never seen before. And then if we go further to the right, we're now going beyond where we are today with AI. We're not going to sure how we get there. We don't know yet. But this would allow us on the bottom, you see here, to have really advanced legal understanding of entire practice areas. Once we get to AGI, transformative AI, that's very capable, then at that point, we would want it to be able to understand all of public law and how to resolve most legal uncertainty. And the reason we want this is a way to validate AI systems, AI agents, before they go out into the world. If an AI developer says, oh, I have this amazing system, it's so highly capable, then we should say, okay, let's benchmark it and make sure it can understand the relevant law that would help keep it aligned and keep it safe, that is appropriate for the level of capabilities that you're talking about here. So, okay, you have a pretty advanced neural network, and in this case, we don't expect that thing to fully understand all of public law, but we at least need it to understand sort of the contract in which it's entering into, contract in quotes, with a human that's deploying it. And in most cases, that's just saying, oh, it's pretty good at prediction, right? But as we go further here to the right, more capable AI, we actually want it to demonstrate that it understands legal standards. So in the case that we talked about earlier, this financial advisor AI, we want it to demonstrate that it knows what a fiduciary duty is. Does it understand in a lot of different novel circumstances what it should be doing to uphold the standard of fiduciary obligation to its principal, to its human that it's managing money on behalf of? And can we validate that? Can we come up with ways to make sure that it exhibits that understanding? And then as we get even more advanced AI, it also needs to understand public law. It needs to understand the whole societal rules and regulations that are trying to constrain its action space in all these different new situations as it's autonomously navigating the real world. And all the while, though, we want to make sure that no matter how advanced AI gets, it's grounded in human judgment. It needs to, at the end of the day, this thing is not making law. It's not involved at all in deciding what we as humans, as a society, uphold as our values. And that's what we're embedding into law through legislation, through regulation, through the court opinions. So no matter how far we get to the right here along the spectrum of AI capabilities, we want to be making sure that it's baked into the design of our AI systems to always be seeking the ground truth from a court, from a regulatory body, from whatever ultimate human determination is needed. And that way we can scale into the continued control of AI systems in a way that is democratically legitimate. So I'll stop there for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, John. This is a fascinating work, and I love the fact that you're sort of elevating the discourse from, this kind of vague concept of ethical AI to, sort of grounded in something that's much more, real and tangible and executable, like, the legal norms that we have in a specific society. I wonder if, we had a similar conversation where we talked about, creating so there's a thought experiment, a robo-lawyer that can pass the bar exam, as to how much, for some of the legal judgments that the machine has to make, how much you can just derive that from the black letter law versus whether you also have to have an ontology of the entire world to some degree, right? Because there's so much sort of background knowledge that a machine has to have to make judgment calls that are actually not really expressed in the law. And I don't know, I guess any robot needs to have an ontology of the world, so they know that, if they jump down a building, then they might actually, gravity will destroy the robot, right? And then they might injure people if they push them in front of the train. But I wonder, I mean, I totally, I love the fact that you sort of bringing it to the next level, right? There's so much discourse about how to build ethical, machines that can make ethical judgments, but, it is so vague and so relative from society to society. And why not ground it in real, in the legal system, right? Which should be a reflection of the ethical judgments of a society to some degree. So anyway, so I was just curious what you think about sort of this, is this a machine only need to know the legal system, or what are the other ontologies it needs to build? Understanding that first step already is a formidable challenge. So
yeah, exactly. So totally. I that's why we think this needs to scale along the capability spectrum. So going back to this part, so we don't expect a ton of legal understanding with very simple systems. But I think like where we're at today, we're in this middle part right here. And so these foundation models, they do exhibit a pretty strong world models. So basically they're databases of a ton of stuff that about how the world works. And they're also reasoning engines about how to use that data to do common sense reasoning. And so I think what we want to do is we want to find the appropriate benchmarks of legal understanding as we are able to match that up with the larger world understanding. So I totally agree with you that we need both. And just a quick thing on like what I mean by how you actually do this with these models, because I think that might be relevant here. So there's the way that we've seen it work for the large language models is they do self-supervision. And when they give it better data for dialogue data, for example, it does better at dialogue at chatbots, basically. They give it mathematical papers, it does better at mathematical reasoning. So then with the legal data, if we leverage the billions of human legal data points, then it's going to plausibly have better legal reasoning and better understanding of the world like that. But I think there's interesting distinctions to be made between when you're training the model on these hundreds of billions of data points, which are the data points where it's learning just knowledge about the world, and which are the data points where it's learning certain reasoning skills like mathematical reasoning, reasoning. And so that's part of the research work to be done here, is exactly what you're talking about parsing. Is this world knowledge? Is this legal knowledge? Or is this another type of knowledge that is learning?
Cool. Bruce, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm taking a lead from you, Roland. John, this is great. I wonder if there's a cohort of data you could mine. Case law does tend to be a little negative and pessimistic, but regulatory and congressional, let's say congressional testimony as to the fact patterns that determine what the law was intended to do
Mhm.
is typically a little more progressive or positive in
Yep.
its intent, and instead of mining the case law where you get the edge issue, I
Yeah.
wonder whether mining the congressional testimony, just to pick a source, um, would would tell the AI something hopeful, would
Yeah.
tell it something that humans actually
Yeah.
don't misbehave all the time. I mean, yes, some parts of congressional law is about that, but especially with FTX in front of us. But what were the positive welfare laws, or what were the positive environmental or other law that were intended, and thereby, if that's the intent of the law,
Yeah.
notwithstanding how it was written into the U.S. code, would that inform the AI in a different way? It's a question. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. So I totally agree. And a lot of, especially with the legislation, a lot of that isn't negative. Almost like a lot of the legislation is more of the positive nature compared to opinions, for example. So for example,
I
a
mean, the
lot of
problem,
the,
John, that I see is that by the time it ends up in the U.S. code,
yeah,
there are a ton of except
yeah,
that that the purity of what was
right,
supposed to
of the
happen has
intention.
been
Yeah.
bastardized. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's why you're pointing to like the congressional record and the things that I think that's a great source of data, and I'll definitely look into how we could leverage that here. The other thing to point out is private law, right? So there's a lot of contract data, which if properly used, that also allows us to talk about the positive things that parties are trying to do together and align themselves to do to accomplish things they couldn't have accomplished alone. And I think that's a big part of how we're thinking about the two prongs of this. One is better instructing AI what to do in a positive way, and that's more contracts, private parties working together, and how does AI learn how to do that from those examples we have today. And then the second thing is what to learn not to do, and that's generally a little bit more of the focus of public law. So that's also part of how we're thinking about this.
Well, and also we have to avoid the mandatory commercial arbitration provisions against consumers, and how constrained the outcomes there are, how unfair they are. So
Yeah, that's a good point.
that's a training data problem. Anyway, thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
So thank you, John. And we're a little bit over the halfway mark already. So so thank you so much, John. If you could perhaps, some people have some additional thoughts and comments in the chat, it would be great if you could try to respond in the chat.
Yeah, I'll check those out and I'll try to respond in the chat. And here's, if you want to you can DM me on Twitter and you can check out my other papers and stuff at that website.
Great. Well, thank you. So it's really great, great presentation, great work. So on behalf of everyone, I'll give you a round of applause, and thank you so much for sharing your work with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks.
Great. So, all right. So I will turn it over to Paul now, who will introduce us to his origami venture. Paul, are you there?
Yes. Thank you, Roland. I'm here. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can hear you. We can't quite see you yet. I can, hold on.
There we go.
Ask to start video.
I think.
Oh, there you are. Okay, we can see you now. And we
good.
cannot see any slideware yet, if you have some.
I think John might have to stop sharing, and then I can.
Okay.
Share. Okay.
Great. Where are you located, Paul?
So I'm located in Chicago, actually.
Great.
North side of Chicago. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. And yeah, I'll just turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roland. Really appreciate you all having me. Thanks to CodeX and Stanford Law for wanting to hear a little bit about origami. So excited to share some things with you today. So today I'm going to talk about Origami, which is a AI-powered client intelligence platform for law firms. It's basically a tool that uses artificial intelligence and machine learning to help attorneys and firms do a better job growing client revenues, preventing client churn and decline, and also encouraging partner cross-selling and cross-collaboration. Just a little bit about my background. Once upon a time, I was an electrical engineer at Johns Hopkins University. I was in the defense industry early part of my career, and I've spent the last 10 years or so in the B2B AI startup space with a focus on legal and compliance technology. So before joining Origami and founding Origami, I founded a company called Norensic, which was an AI platform that used machine learning to identify market manipulation. So I got a lot of experience trying building AI solutions that actually attorneys, regulators, and compliance officers could actually use to do their jobs better. So that brings me to Origami. So Origami actually emerged from some cool analytics machine learning consulting work that we did in a consulting firm that I'm involved with called Lotus Blue Consulting, based in Chicago. And several years ago, we did a project, or several projects, I would say, with a couple of large international multi-billion-dollar law firms, where we built machine learning models to help them do a better job identifying at-risk client accounts. And we were really successful using machine learning applied to internal firm enterprise data to be able to accurately predict whether or not client accounts that were their customers were at risk of churn. And actually, the technology, or the project, was actually dubbed Moneyball for law firms, and it got a lot of decent attention in the press, in the Financial Times, and there were articles written about the work. And so we decided inside the consulting firm several years ago that maybe this technology that was basically analytics models could be productized into what we would call a client intelligence platform and monitoring system that firms could use every day to help themselves do a better job at accelerating their own revenues. So talk a little bit about what Origami actually is in a nutshell. So when we think about the problem that we're solving with Origami, every year law firms experience what we call lost revenue from existing client accounts, right? And for large firms, there's basically two causes for this. Poor retention leads to revenue decline and client churn. So if clients are not being managed well, they eventually stop buying services from law firms and take their work to other law firms. And another cause is what we call poor cross-selling, where you might have missed opportunities to actually sell clients new services within the firm and introduce them to new capabilities and service offerings, but those introductions, for whatever reason, are not made. And so there's an opportunity to sell additional services, but firms are not doing that with their clients. So when you think about why this happens in law firms in particular, law firms are very busy delivering work and actually doing the difficult legal work that they do for their clients versus selling. And many firms don't really have dedicated sales functions. They might have a marketing function or BD function, but by and large, the partners that manage relationships are often focused on managing the matters and actually doing legal work rather than looking ahead to anticipate what their clients' needs are. And so as a result, each professional sees only a small part of the overall client relationship. And we see that critical information about client opportunities is often siloed across the firm in sort of the minds and knowledge of individuals, like within the firm, different partners that might touch a large client relationship, as well as in different data systems that capture aspects of how that client relationship is managed and the work is performed for those clients. So when we think about how much missed revenue opportunity occurs in firms each year, well, for large and mid-sized firms, and we're talking about firms that have hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, maybe hundreds of professionals and attorneys working in the firm, many of these firms can lose to 30% of their existing client business each year. So doing just a little bit better, if you're a firm that does $1 billion in revenue a year, let's say, doing just 5% better or worse for a small percentage of your client population, say 5 to 10% of clients, can actually impact firm revenues by $20 million or more. And we actually saw that in consulting work we had done with large firms, that by just taking a few targeted actions based on the outputs of a predictive model, firms actually are able to recoup tens of millions of dollars. We saw like $40 million in revenue that was recovered by taking targeted action over the course of a year that might have otherwise been lost if those actions were not taken. So the vision behind Origami is really to be the world's most powerful client intelligence platform for law firms. And we do this by applying artificial intelligence and machine learning predictive modeling to all the data that a firm has about its clients, its services, and its people. And the idea is to achieve more revenue and stronger client relationships through this AI and through predictive analytics that help augment and support the individuals that manage those relationships and build those business partnerships with their clients. So Origami is really designed to help firms do these 4 key things, right? Build stronger, deeper, and longer lasting client relationships, capture new growth opportunities by introducing new matters and practice areas, new service offerings that the client's likely to need, to achieve better matter execution and client service delivery, actually give the client a better experience working with the firm, and also to improve what we call engagement and communications with key stakeholders. And what we mean there is actually create conversations between partners about better ways to meet clients' needs and information sharing between different practices to be able to do better with cross-selling and cross-collaboration. So in a nutshell, when we talk about how Origami works, we think about it in having sort of 3 components, right? The first component is the enterprise data integration component. And that's where we extract all sorts of interesting data from a firm's enterprise systems that it has in-house, right? So we look particularly closely at finance and billing data, which is actually quite a rich source of information inside firms because you're tracking, what attorneys are spending their time on in small increments. It captures who's working together on teams and all of the various taxonomies about how work is performed and how teams evolve over time and touch that client relationship. We also look at people data from the HR and skills and inventory management systems. So capturing kind of how the organization is structured, as well as sort of what are the different roles in the firm and characteristics and skills and experience of the individual attorneys and professionals. And we can enrich that with data from the CRM system that captures sales and pitch opportunities, as well as marketing activity with clients, and communications metadata from emails, chats, and meeting digital exhaust that captures sort of what are the interactions and touch points, both of individuals internally to the firm that perform the work and also externally to client stakeholders. And we can also use what we call external data feeds. Most firms subscribe to kind of external data vendors that provide them information about their own client accounts and companies and industry news and so on. And we can actually enrich with that data as well. So we store all this business of law data together into what we call a firm data model. And Origami creates a purpose-built data asset that evolves over time for this purpose. And we run our predictive analytics models on top of that, and we're able to actually make predictions, and in some cases fairly accurate predictions, about where growth opportunities and risks are within the firm. So we're able to actually produce for users and consumers of the outputs of these models, information such as where are the biggest growth opportunities in the firm? Where do you have clients that, if we engage with them, we'd actually be able to grow revenue significantly and make a more sticky and productive client relationship? What are the service needs? What are the matters that certain types of clients are likely to buy or likely to need in the future, given where they are and the kind of organization they are? And also, what are the client management behaviors that we need to undertake, or we should be undertaking, that will lead to more likelihood of the client being retained long-term by the firm, and kind of pave the way and increase the opportunity for growth of that account. I will say, just from a technology perspective, Origami keeps firm data safe, and we do this by installing Origami within a firm's 4 walls. So we often get asked, are you extracting all this sensitive business data outside of the firm, and are you combining data with other firms and so on? We would love down the road potentially to explore a community-based learning model, but right now we just install individual instances of Origami within each firm customer. So we're just using the firm's own data to train the models to make predictions about the future that help them do a better job growing their client accounts. So in a nutshell, just to recap everyone, the insights that we provide are, number 1, which clients are at risk or have potential growth opportunities? What additional services or matters are the clients likely to need in the future? Who in the firm can you introduce to best expand the client relationship in terms of collaborating across practices or within practice areas? Why clients have certain needs and which of those needs are most important in terms of management behaviors? And then how to engage in proactive communications with clients, or internally with clients and across practices, right? So how to share knowledge about how to better collaborate on client accounts. So the way that Origami works, when we kind of get deeper into sort of how our algorithms work, we have one family of algorithms that we call Origami Client Growth Recommendations. And this is where we actually look at the client journeys through the history of their relationship with the firm to best identify cross-selling opportunities that support client growth. And we kind of describe this by analogy to customers as it's kind of like, like how Amazon predicts your behaviors and provides a recommender system that says, hey, people like you who bought this product might buy these other products. So we can do the same thing with client services within professional services firms and law firms. So if we imagine a client that's maybe a single practice, one-time matter that maybe purchased one matter or did one matter with a firm that for $40,000, our AI can look at this particular client, all of the demographics and information about the client, and we can basically say, well, here's some matter and service recommendations this client's likely to need in the future. And we can steer them in areas that are strategically interesting or beneficial to the overall.
Paul, are you still? Did my computer freeze or did Paul's computer freeze?
I think it's Paul. I don't hear him either.
Oh, okay. All right. That's too bad.
Yeah, I'm DMing him right now.
Okay. Thanks, Susan, for troubleshooting. Yeah, he should be joining us again if he gets his computer back up.
Okay, I believe he's left the meeting. So yeah.
So sorry, I don't know what happened. My Zoom just
there
crashed.
you are. Okay.
Yeah. Can I just pick up where I left off? Sorry about that.
Sure.
Yes, please.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It just I just noticed I wasn't connected anymore. So sorry about that. Okay. Let me share here. So we have what we call client growth recommendations that, I think, as I mentioned, behave kind of like a recommender system that identify for clients like a particular client that bought some service in the past, what are the other services that this type of client is likely to need. And so we can recommend, highly profitable offerings or strategically aligned new service offerings, or perhaps multi-service bundled offerings that are priced and lumped together as a means of identifying what are the services that a client's likely to need and encouraging cross-selling and cross-collaboration with those accounts. So the analogy we give is sort of like Amazon for new matters and services for large clients. And we also have a functionality we call Origami Health Scores, which is basically the idea that you might have two clients, client A and client B, that on the surface might look quite similar to each other in the sense of they have a similar amount of annual billed fees, they've had a relationship that's of similar length with the firm, or they've been involved and done work with this, the same number of practice areas that are active. But actually, when you look deeper into the data, you identify that one of these clients is much healthier than the other in terms of likelihood of being retained versus churning and taking work to another firm. Right. And so we kind of describe it as kind of like a FICO credit score or credit monitoring system for the health of your accounts that adjusts and evolves over time as new data becomes available. And the idea is we can provide scoring algorithms to each client in the portfolio based on historical drivers of growth and risk of decline. And then we can actually take action based upon what these drivers are to improve the health of poorly performing clients and then accelerate the performance of healthier clients. And so within the drivers of client health, we measure hundreds of different metrics that we can extract from data, but we can kind of group them into different factors that drive overall likelihood of clients being retained with the firm for a long time versus leaving. So there's drivers that are based on the delivery process, so sort of how matters and projects are managed, sort of the processes of management, how the work is delivered overall. There's cross-collaboration based factors, so organizational level signals around how many folks are collaborating with clients, what is the nature of industry and geographic collaboration, as well as the relationship networks among the partners and individuals in the firm that know each other and have worked together in the past, and what is kind of the network and relationship reach of that client's relationship in the firm. We can also look at client demographics. So what are the characteristics of the client themselves in terms of as a company, where they're located, the size, the organizational entity, and the trends of what they buy. We can also look at team composition. So what are the team roles, responsibility, kind of leverage characteristics, experiences, capabilities, and individual characteristics and performance of all the members of that team that serve the client, and can we correlate that with positive outcomes or negative outcomes? And then finally, business administration, which is how are we doing with billing patterns, collections, and pitching and pricing with the client, and is that going to lead to growth opportunities or potential risk? as well as external market data. So are there industry or macroeconomic events that are driving the client's needs, and how can we leverage those to anticipate work opportunities with them, new matters, or potentially risk in the account? So with that said, I have a quick demo I can run through to kind of show you all what the software looks like.
Sure, but if you could leave a little bit of time for questions, that would be great too. So we have 10 more minutes left.
Sure. I'll run through the software quickly in about 5 minutes. I'll give you a quick tour.
Sure. That's good.
Yeah. So a user in the firm who could be a partner or a firm leader or someone involved with marketing and BD might actually log into Origami and see a screen like this, where they can see, of all of the client accounts under their control, right? That in this case, we're looking at the entire firm, right? What is the total growth potential of all of these accounts? Like, what do all the algorithms that have identified new opportunities for all of the clients together? What is that revenue opportunity for growth? And sort of how is that decomposed across various firm verticals, such as, labor and employment, global regulatory, corporate, et cetera. And then also next to that, we can see what is the 12-month revenue history of the firm, right? So in this case, this firm had $706 million in revenue over the last rolling 12 months. But Origami believes that there's $353 million in additional revenue that could be captured by additional service offerings that clients could buy. And so in this case, there's a growth potential panel on the right here that displays the top opportunities in my firm. So I can see Hawthorne Industries as a client that has 2.4 million in growth potential. Aperture Science has 2.1 million in growth potential, and so on and so forth. And here's the top projects that we might offer those clients. So if I double click into Hawthorne Industries, which is a client opportunity example, I find that, hold on, I need to log back in here, apologies. I find that Origami identifies 3 potential new projects that Hawthorne Industries is likely to need in the near future, right? And so we find that there's a commercial data protection matter, a venture capital transaction matter, and perhaps a licensing and distribution matter. And these are the average revenue ranges of these types of matters over time, and also all the individuals that are most experienced within the firm that would be good collaborators in terms of making introductions to the client relationship. We have various ways we measure experience based upon amount of time that individuals have spent in different parts of their work over time, as well as other skills and experience and other accolades from people data that we can use. And so I can basically look and I can say, okay, for each of these, what if I want to view all the potential projects? And in this case, there's just 3 listed out here, but I can see what are all of the matters that we could be offering this client in the future. And what are the existing projects that I'm working on with this client? What are the existing matters that they're actively engaged in, right? I can also then, for this particular client, an opportunity, I can go and I can look at the health of the client, right? So I can actually go and say, okay, let's take a look at their health scores. So by clicking on their health scores, I can see that their health score has been evolving over time and took a dip in the last few months, but now it's back up on the rise. And so the score right now is what we call good. So we have our health score range. We've scaled it. It's kind of similar to a credit score between 100 and 700, where 700 is the highest score in terms of client health. And we can see that there's some factors that are bringing it down from being higher than it might otherwise be. And so we break the score into different themes and features. So I can see that the AI has identified that delivery process may be an issue with this particular client, right? And so I can see their score is 205, which is low, and it's dropped. And I can click into here and I can see, okay, well, there's different reasons why that Origami has identified are impacting the likelihood of this client being retained and maybe having some risks, right? So I can see that adherence to budget has gone down, number of in-person meetings has gone down recently. And so there's things that the manager of the client relationship can actually do to improve the health of that account. So I can click and go to show me next steps, and it actually surfaces targeted recommendations that a user who is a relationship manager of Hawthorne Industries might be able to do to increase the health. So increasing adherence to budget, increasing the number of in-person meetings, and improving the partner engagement in delivery. And we present these recommendations as well as some kind of contextual statistics, similar to kind of like you might see sports statistics when watching a basketball game, where it says, clients, this client is deviated 40% from the budget plan, and clients that do that, are 4 times more likely to churn in the next 12 months. So just like statistical information from the data that we can use to provide context. So I know we're about out of time. This gives you a flavor of the UI. There's other features to share, but I'm happy to open up to questions.
Cool, thank you. So first of all, I think it's very interesting. I would say what would be interesting too is like to go a little bit more, provide a little bit more examples of what the signals are for certain things. Yeah, what's an actual signal for somebody to churn, for a company to churn, or for an opportunity to arise. So I understand that, okay, if the law changes in a particular area and you have a client, who is, let's say, an AI company, and there's a new AI law out there, well, that's an opportunity to engage. So you get the signal from the outside world, maybe from Congress. But how about those internal signals? I think you can probably, I get it. Okay, if your firm's not, the client's not paying his or her bills, then that might be a signal for something, right? If there's not very many recent interactions from recent months, might say something about the health of the client account, not so much about the client might actually be like, great, we have no legal issues at the moment, things are just chugging along, which might, good news for the client, bad news for the law firm. But anyway, so I'm curious about some, a little bit more detail on the specific signals. That's my first question. And the second question is, what's the business model? How do you make money? And then yeah, I see Bruce has his hand up, and yeah, we only have about 4 more minutes left. So.
Yes, so maybe I'll answer the business model question very quickly. So we are a B2B software as a service business model. So we actually contract with firms on a recurring revenue basis. And we basically our pricing model is based on the size of the firm revenue, right? We also have some proof of concept opportunities where we can do kind of a professional services mini version of a proof of concept to get a flavor for the analytics that then kind of contributes to the overall cost of the implementation.
Got it. And okay, what about the signals?
Signals. Well, there's you want to give examples of signals. There's a ton of different types of signals. There's as an example, billing and collections patterns that indicate a client might be at risk of churn. They're paying their bills late. There's patterns around potentially network effects of relationships within the firm. Is the client well networked in the firm in terms of like the folks that they know? Are they influencers? Do they know other people very well in the firm? Are those relationships changing? There's communications frequency issues that are sort of, we're not communicating.
Data that comes from the email accounts.
Yeah, pulled from email systems, pulled from HR systems, pulled from from billing data systems inside the firm. So an example could be like the team staffing model. So your team is not staffed well in terms of leverage, and that's creating issues in terms of how the work might be delivered. There's examples of the skills and experience of individuals. We've seen expertise be a strong indicator. For example, individuals that do not have like a significant percentage of their time spent in the industry of the client they're serving, those clients tend to be more likely to churn in the future. Whereas clients that have more experts spending more time as a percentage of total time tend to have more likelihood of growth. So it kind of implies some potential staffing changes or introductions to new individuals inside the firm. We also see like, as you mentioned, external data sources, so news events or merger and acquisition events or things like that that could affect a client's industry. And there's various other ones as well, right? There's just different ways we can slice and dice all that data.
Cool. Bruce?
Yeah, I'm thinking, how would the non-traditional legal services be scored? So, for example, somebody figures out how to save a client $100,000 in litigation, and so that's $100,000 that didn't get billed because of some proactive step, or and instead of this a la carte pricing model, a prefix model, where the firm took the risk of containing the costs, and the client got the benefit. How does that get scored in your model?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, firms will sometimes tag whether technology was used or whether certain types of alternative legal services providers were used in the billing data, or whether or not certain ways of doing the work made it more efficient. So in some cases, we can measure that from the billing data and from the billing data artifacts and correlate that with outcomes. Obviously, net rate information and profitability are important metrics that firms track in terms of their own reporting. And sometimes they're tracked different ways within the firm. And so we can kind of incorporate the various different definitions of those. Pricing and profitability are kind of challenging topics for firms generally. So we can provide kind of as part of the implementation, various points of view on those analytics that help them make decisions on whether they're strategically valuable to do that in a certain way or not. Because there's a trade-off of whether, are you going to save money or are you going to improve efficiency and retain the client more effectively? So we can incorporate those by tagging the different matters at the matter level and sort of understanding statistically whether or not those clients were actually likely to grow overall in terms of revenue or whether they weren't.
Paul, the competition isn't just between losing the client to another law firm. The competition is between the client taking the matter in-house and hiring the associate who used to work for you. So, and not, outsourcing it. So I just wonder how you might use this analytics, Origami's analytics, to show the value add of outsourcing the matter instead of taking it in-house as a repeatable pattern of legal needs. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. Absolutely. I think there's you mentioned retention, if someone's taking an attorney and hiring them in-house to do the work in a legal department. There's a lot of use cases related to our analytics around staffing and retention and sort of people outcomes. So that's an area we want to expand into is lateral partner success, partner retention and talent retention more broadly.
Great.
Cool. Great.
Thank
well,
you.
we're 2 minutes over time. Let's close here. So I think Susan already shared Paul's email address. So if you folks have any more questions for Paul, please send him an email. Thank you, Paul, for your great presentation. Thank you, John, for your great presentation. And really appreciate you and sharing with our community here. And please keep us posted. And so with that, wish you all a great rest of your week, a great Thanksgiving week. Susan, do we have something in the week after Thanksgiving or?
The week after that, so we have on the 8th, we've got an internal event.
December 8th, next meeting, and we'll send out an update on that as soon as we can. And so good to see you all. Have a great Thanksgiving. See you next time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.